Well, if you haven't met, my name's David. I'm one of the pastors here, and it's my privilege to welcome you and to welcome those online. And if you weren't here last week, then you missed us unveiling our new vision as we began a vision series as a church. For the last year and a half, we have sought God in community, and we believe that God has spoken. He has given us a vision that isn't something that we pulled from Scripture and then we're writing a vision statement, but we believe that he actually gave us Isaiah 61, the passage that Kelsey read, as our vision statement, this beautiful passage from the Old Testament part of the Bible that explains God's redemptive vision for his world and for his people. And I believe God has invited us as a community called Central Heights to make this passage our vision, and that he is sending us in the power of the Spirit to go live this out so that in our day and in our time, we would see Isaiah 61 come to life in greater ways. I believe that, and I believe it strongly. Which brings us to our time together today, because we are taking about 5 weeks to kind of unpack this. And today we are going to do something a little bit different in that last week was like this 30,000 foot flyover where we situated ourselves in Isaiah 61. We looked at the context and what God was doing as he spoke through this prophet named Isaiah. But today I want to go down from 30,000 feet to ground level and zero in on the end of verse 3, and the word specifically for the display of his splendor. Now, when you hear that and you hear it read, it might sound strange. It might even sound a little churchy. It's different than how we normally talk. See, here we're trying to make faith accessible in the sense that we don't water down truth, but what we're actually trying to do is help it. So if you're here for the very first time, that as we speak and as we welcome you and we do life, that you can actually track with us. And so we may not be used to this language, but when we slow down and we unpack it, what we find is it's deeply beautiful, and it speaks to something about who we are as humans and what we were made for and what we are sent to do by God. And so the step that we're taking today is to ask this question: what does "for the display of his splendor" actually mean? What is God inviting us into when we read this at the end of these verses from verse 1 to 3? What is he inviting us into and sending us to do? How are these two things tied together? Well, for starters, that word "for the display of his splendor" is all actually one word in Hebrew. It means to display one's glory or make one's glory known. It means to acknowledge, to recognize, and esteem something or someone. And so in this case, in this context, that's someone that we are acknowledging, recognizing, esteeming, the person that we are going to display their glory and make their glory known is God. That his, in this little phrase, is God. That the splendor and the glory that is meant to be displayed is Yahweh's. The one true God who showed up in a burning bush to a man named Moses. The one true God who led his people out of slavery in Egypt. Who created the world, rules over it, who is always present, who has always existed, always will be, and always is, and is all-powerful. This is the God that's glory is meant to be made known and is to be revealed to the ends of the earth. And so what Isaiah is talking about is displaying God's glory, and he's talking about how God's people are meant to go and do that, by how they live their lives individually and in community as God's people. And so what we need to see is that God's redemptive vision, Isaiah 61 is a redemptive vision that God is giving to his people, has an outcome. It has a purpose for which those who join their life by faith to this God are meant to inhabit, to live out. And that purpose is that God's people would recognize, acknowledge, and esteem the God of the universe above all things, and then join him in making all things new. And one of the primary ways that we are going to do that, Isaiah says, is to live in such a way that God's glory and his splendor gets displayed through our lives. And then here's the thing: when you nerd out and you look a little bit deeper into what this actually means in the Hebrew, it's a verb, which means this is a state of being. This is an action and the result of something. Go one step further, and it's what's called an infinitive construct. Describes a person who is living out an action. So this is somebody that has received a state of being as the result of something that has happened and is now being sent to continuously live this out in their lives. So this is about something that we are as humans and something that we are to do. It's something we are and something that we are to do. And so to understand this better, we're going to go back to the very first book of the Bible called Genesis. And there, in the first chapter of the story of God, what we see is this front row seat to God creating the universe and everything in it. For 6 days, God creates out of nothing. He speaks, and a formless and void world starts to take shape. It has form, and it has order, and it is filled with life. And on the seventh day, this God rests from this act of creating. And so what we see in Genesis 1 is this beautiful, picture of an architect and an artist, God creating the heavens and the earth and everything in it. He's crafting the world we live in. He's making it a place for you and I, for humans to experience and enjoy his presence. And then in verse 26 and 27, God speaks about humanity, the pinnacle of his creation. And he says these words that we cannot miss and we cannot ignore. In verse 26, then God said, let us make mankind in our image, in our likeness, so that they may rule over the fish in the sea and the birds in the sky, over the livestock and all the wild animals, and over all the creatures that move along the ground. So God created mankind in his own image. In the image of God, he created them. Male and female, he created them. So we see God's intention right from the beginning that he creates humans with purpose. And that purpose is tied up in the phrase that in theological language is the image of God, the imago Dei. And what we see here in Genesis is that the image of God is central to who we are as people. It's the Hebrew word Salem, which is and can be translated as an idol or statue. And in the ancient Near East, an idol or a statue was a visible representation of an invisible being. And so if you went around in the ancient Near East at this time, what you would see is that there were temples, and all these temples had gods that they would worship. And in every temple, there was a statue that was a visible representation of the god that temple was built for. So people would come and they would see this god, and they would worship this god through this physical representation of it. And so Genesis is written within this context, but it tells a different story. It tells a different story. It takes the same idea that was common in the ancient Near East, and it applies it to you and to me and to every single human being who has ever been born. This idea that in his book, Garden City, John Mark Comer explains like this. He says, we are God's statues. We are put on earth to make visible the invisible God, to show the world what God is like through how we live, how we talk, how we spend our time, how we create the things that we do. In other words, humanity is the Creator's representative to the world. We are made in the image of God. We can reflect his likeness to the world, that we are physical representations of a divine being able to reflect him to the world around us. And this is not just for a select few. It's not just for people with royalty or degrees or paid professionals. This is for every single human being. That built into who you are is someone with infinite value who bears the likeness of God and has been created for the purpose of joining God in taking his world somewhere, and mainly and primarily is representing that God to the world through who you are and what you do. From the very start, God made us to be like him so that we could show the world who he is. And at this point, you might be wondering, why take this rabbit trail all the way down here? Why talk about something that happened in Genesis when we're here to talk about our vision and where we're going as a church from Isaiah 61? Well, the reason is that what God intended at the beginning is still very, very important in understanding how we live out Isaiah 61. It has everything to do with the vision that God is laying out here. Because the story that you and I are living in is a story where God paints this beautiful canvas called the universe. And as you know, he says it's good and very good. Like he looks at it and it's like a very good thing. But then if you know the story, that humans try to take God's place in that. They aren't satisfied with the part that God had given them to play, and they try and push God out. They eat of the forbidden fruit, and then creation gets fractured. The human, our beings and our hearts get fractured, and our relationships with one another get fractured. Creation becomes fractured and is in need of healing. And thankfully, the story goes that God is so committed to what he has created that he will not give up on it. He will not quit. He is out to restore what has been ruined to its original purpose, including us. So a way to think about it is that creation and we need to be rebuilt. In college, if you are new here, I used to play hockey, and I was playing college hockey in the States, and I wrecked my shoulder. And it needed to be completely rebuilt. And it was so bad. I had what's called a sublex. If I got hit a certain way, or I moved a certain way on the ice, or even just getting up off a chair, my shoulder would dislocate but snap back into place. It was called a sublex. And so over time, the ligaments in my shoulder got torn. I had bone chips floating around in there. My shoulder was a mess, and they said the only way that this is going to be fixed is if we do surgery to completely rebuild your shoulder. Well, 4.5 months later of rehab and physio and strength training, and I have a completely rebuilt shoulder that is back to what it was originally created to do, to help me move, to lift things, to play sports, whatever it was. I needed major surgery to restore my shoulder so it could work in the way it was intended. This is the story that we find ourselves in. The story the Bible is telling us that God made us as image bearers who are alive to represent him to the world. We tried to take God's place. It wrecked everything, and creation needs to be rebuilt and restored so that God's original purposes can be fulfilled. That's the story we find ourselves in. And so when we come to Isaiah 60 and 61, what we start to hear is echoes of Eden, echoes of God's commitment and what he is going to do. Isaiah 60, verse 1-2 says these words. This is God speaking through Isaiah. He says, "Arise, shine, for your light has come, and the glory of the Lord rises upon you. See, darkness covers the earth, and thick darkness is over the peoples. But the Lord rises upon you, and his glory appears over you." And so God starts to paint this beautiful, transcendent, massive picture of how he is going to come, that the world is covered in thick darkness and nothing can break in but God's light and God's glory, his presence, the weight of his beauty, and all that he is going to break in. It's going to transform Zion, this city called Jerusalem. What God is doing is promising this pivotal moment is coming in history when he is going to intervene himself, and he is going to bring light that will break through the darkness that covers the earth. And on that day, verse 20 says, God will be our everlasting light. That the sun and the moon will not be needed anymore because God himself, his blazing holiness, his light will be so bright that it'll light up everything. And guess what? Verse 20 says, our sorrows will end. They will be no more. But it's what verse 9 that's so intriguing to me as I was looking at this, is it says in verse 9, the Holy One of Israel, for he has endowed you with splendor. Meaning God gives us his glory, gives us his splendor, gives us beauty. Why? Well, verse 21 tells us that so that we will then go and reflect his glory and beauty to the world around us. And in that, people will see something of who God is. God says in verse 21, this will come to pass. I will do this. This will happen, and it will all be for the display of my glory and my splendor. That when I do this, my glory and my splendor will show up in an unimaginable way. And we don't attain this by our effort. It's not something that we earn. It's not something that we even deserve. But graciously, God shows up and says, I will do this. And I will do this through a figure called the Anointed One. Isaiah 61, the Spirit of the Sovereign Lord is on me. Notice how, again, God is the driving force of this vision. This is not a human invention. This is not something that we can ultimately make happen. God's redemptive vision is primarily theocentric. He is the focus. He's the driving force behind this cosmic vision. We play an important part, but we are not the center. We're not even the main actor in the drama. See, I'm a movie buff. I love movies. We used to go to movies a lot before we had kids. Now we just go once in a while, but I've always loved movies, and the way I like to think about this is that God is the writer, producer, director, and star of a drama being played out in history. We are not the center. He is. This vision is about the sovereign Lord. He's the main character who stands at the center of all reality, and as the creator, he is setting terms for how his creation is meant to live. And it's his spirit who empowers this vision. We talked last week about that word spirit. It means wind, breath. God's presence and power called the Holy Spirit. And so this vision of God is driven by God, and it is powered by him. It has his breath upon it. God's power will bring this to life. And nowhere do we see this more clearly than through this anointed one. The messianic figure in Isaiah and really throughout the entire Bible before Jesus is dominated by this figure that is whispered in some passages, shouted in others, this anointed one, this Messiah, who's going to be God's agent of salvation and justice in the world. Just read Isaiah. Just take one book, the book of Isaiah. It's dominated by this person. Just a couple snapshots. Isaiah chapter 7. Verse 14 says, a child's going to come, and that child will be born, and that child's name will be Emmanuel, God with us. What about Isaiah 9 and 53? A king is going to come, and he's going to bring a great light to those living in darkness. This king is going to set up a kingdom of justice and righteousness and peace that's going to last forever. And he's going to do this unexpectedly by dying a gruesome death for others. For you, for me, and then he's going to come back to life, and that anyone who wants it, he is going to pour out his spirit and his salvation on that individual, on those people. God's redemptive vision, it orbits around this anointed one and what this anointed one will do. Because this one, anointed one is going to come and bring God's vision to life. He will come and rescue his people from something to something. And he will utterly transform heaven and earth, fully and completely and finally. And so through the anointed one, God is going to breathe again. Through this anointed one, God is going to breathe again. And although it is ultimately God who's going to make this happen, he wants you and I to be involved in that. He wants you and I to play our part, which is something both incredibly awesome and something that we sometimes miss. It's awesome because it tells you that you are not an accident, that your life matters, that you were created for a purpose, and that you are loved by a creator who wants a relationship with you, and he has something for you to do within the world. He wants to partner with you to see Isaiah 61 come to life. That is awesome. But we often miss this, or at the very least, there are some barriers that get in the way of us actually fully embracing this or stepping into it. There's probably more, but I want to highlight 4. 1, no one's ever told you this before. You've never heard that your life matters, or that God loves you. You've never had anyone show you that there is something more to live for. And so you're here, and this is the first time you're hearing it. No one's ever told you or described these realities to you before. The other reason is that sometimes we often think this is only for the paid professionals and an elite select few people. People like myself who are in full-time pastoral ministry or missionaries on another part of the world, that we sometimes think this is only for a select few. Well, we've already said that's not true. This is for all human beings. Sometimes we compartmentalize our lives too. We have our God box, and then we have our everything else box. And so on Sundays we come and we worship God, and we go to community group and we spend our time with God. But then when we go out into the world, we don't see God going into that. And so we have our everyday life box where we go to school or we work or we parent or we stand in line at the grocery store, and all those things that we have these 2 different boxes when God created it all to work together and all to be for something bigger. His glory and the good of others. Or lastly, I don't have what it takes. God couldn't possibly use me. If I'm honest, that's the one I struggle with the most. That's my barrier. How could God use me? How could God use someone like me who thought he was not interesting, nor relevant, or compelling for like 80% of his life? How could he use me? See, some of that we're in this room and are like, how could God actually use someone like me? That's a barrier. And again, there's probably more, but so often we fail to step in and fully embrace what God is inviting us to play our part because something is getting in the way. And I would just ask you to consider, what is that getting in the way? What is it for you? But what I want us to see is that ultimately this is not about you. It is not about me. It is not about what we can do. It is about God and what he can do with a bunch of people who say, I am here, I am available, and I'm ready to go. Show me what you want me to do. That is what this is ultimately about. God is the driving force behind this redemptive vision he has for us and for the world. And so in Isaiah 61, God is promising, I'm going to breathe again. I'm going to breathe again. I am going to change things. Where you are now is not where this story is in. Hold on to this because it's going to come to pass. And of all the breaths that God has ever breathed, his greatest breath is Jesus. See, Isaiah 61 is ultimately pointing us to that moment when the God of the universe steps into his creation, becomes human in the person of Jesus. And when that happens, two things are going on. The first is that in Jesus, God displays his glory. God displays his glory. See, when we look at Jesus, he is how God has spoken most clearly about himself. Jesus makes the God of the universe known to us so that when we read about Jesus, when we look at Jesus, when we listen to him, we see God in human form. This is highlighted in several places in the New Testament part of the Bible. In Colossians 1:15 and 19, it says, the Son is the image of the invisible God, that Jesus makes visible an invisible God. It says, for God was pleased to have all his fullness dwell in him. So when we see Jesus, the fullness of God is there. Or what about Hebrews 1:3? It says, the Son is the radiance of God's glory and the exact representation of his being. Is that Jesus, through his life, the things he said, the things he did, he was radiating the glory of God. Because he is God. Or famously, John 1:14, talking about Jesus, it says, the Word became flesh and made his dwelling among us. We have seen his glory, the glory of the one and only Son who came from the Father, full of grace and truth. And so in Jesus, God displays his glory. Jesus makes God most fully known to us. And in Jesus, God brings Isaiah 61 to life. We talked about this passage last week. It's in Luke 4. Jesus is in the synagogue. And he's asked to read from the scriptures. And they hand him a scroll, which just so happens to be the scroll of Isaiah. I don't know if you caught this, but Jesus grabs the scroll and he actually searches through its pages to find Isaiah 61. And then he reads it. And then he hands the scroll back and he sits down and all the eyes in the synagogue are fastened on him. Everyone's looking at him. Everyone is like, what is just happening? And Jesus says these words, today this has been fulfilled. Remember when Isaiah spoke a passage about an anointed one who would come and speak good news and bind up brokenhearted people and set captives free and bring people into the light from darkness? He goes, guess what? That's me. I'm the anointed one. I'm here to do it. And then he went and did it, which was completely unexpected. Israel thought that the Messiah would come and turn them into a national and political superpower. Jesus comes and does something completely unexpected. And sometimes the most unexpected things are the best and most beautiful things. When we had our youngest son, the time from when Catherine went into labor and the time he was born was 1 hour and 20 minutes. Yes, I know. You should applaud for my wife. Yeah. But I was having a nap, and I heard Kathy yelling in the other room. And so like a good husband, I grabbed my phone and texted her, why are you yelling? I'm trying to sleep. Because you know me, I love naps, right? And so I put my phone back and went back to sleep. And then she kept yelling, and I got upset, and I walked out, and I see her, and she goes, Jack's coming. And And I was like, oh, this just got real. So we were living in a basement suite, so we took our oldest son, Levi, up to them because they were going to watch when my parents were coming from Coquitlam. I get her in the car, and we're driving, and I'm like freaking out because I know that they told us that this baby's probably going to come fast, and I'm like, what if we have the baby in the car? And while I'm freaking out, Cass praying, Jesus, Jesus, help me. And we arrive at the hospital, and I've been at the hospital a lot, so I've never seen this happen, but there was at the front door just a completely random wheelchair. So I'm carrying, basically shuffling my wife along. I put her in there, and then we start running through the lobby, and it was like a movie because the piano's there, right? And someone's playing a soundtrack as we're chugging through the hospital. We get in the room. All the nurses and everyone descends on Kath. I'm just kind of bumped out of the way, and I got all the bags. And so I turn over and I drop all our bags on the couch, and I turn back to go be with my wife, and the nurse says, in your next push, your baby's coming. And he did. And it was the most beautiful moment. I got to hold my baby boy. It was awesome, and it was completely scary, but it was completely unexpected. And sometimes the most unexpected things are also the most beautiful things. Sorry, I'm just thinking about it. See, when Jesus came, it wasn't what people expected. They thought one thing, Jesus came to do another. He shares the good news. He says there's hope for you, that you are not too far from God, that you are not too broken, you are not too messy, you are not unimportant like culture and society has made you feel. I got good news. The time has come. God's rule and reign is breaking in. You have a seat at the table. Repent, believe in me, and you can be a part of this. And then he goes out and he rescues people from something to them. He did it in his life, in ministry, but ultimately through his death and resurrection, he brings people from hurt to healing and healed. He brings people from being a captive to being set free. From living in darkness to living in the light, from mourning to joy. He takes the ashes, which is a sign of grief and despair, and he says, I'm going to put a crown of beauty on you. I'm going to turn your despair into joy and praise. And so Jesus comes and he makes people new. He brings them from something and into something, makes them a new creation, gives them new hearts and new desires. And he forms this community of people that are changed by him and who are committed to him above all things. And he sends them out to change the world, to continue what he started. Here's my spirit, now go do it. So I tell you all that because Jesus, he fulfills the redemptive vision of Isaiah 61. He gives us his spirit, and then he sends us to continue what he started, meaning that we have a mission and a purpose that is bigger than us. It's a mission to display the splendor and the glory of God and the power of the Spirit, to join Jesus in seeing Isaiah 61 come to life. It's born in the heart of God. It spans the ages. It encompasses the entire cosmos. It's fueled by the power of God. It involves the transformation of all things. And for some reason, incredibly, God says, I want to partner with you to do it. You and I are being invited to play a part in this mission. Playing a part in seeing Isaiah 61 come to life. But here's what happens, and this is something it frustrates me as a leader. We celebrate that we are saved from sin, Satan, and death. And hear me, we are never going to stop preaching the good news. It is the power of God unto salvation. Our only hope lies in Jesus and what he has done. But we have to become a community that remembers that we are saved into something. That we are not just saved from something to then hold on and just ride it out until the end of time, or we go to be with Jesus after we die. But that we have a purpose in the meantime until he comes back. That we are saved from sin, Satan, and death into a life with God both now and forever. And that will always be at its core is that we are a church that will teach the gospel, and we will go down teaching the gospel. But we have also been rescued to become something and to live for something. We're going to talk about this more in a few weeks, but we have been rescued to become an oak of righteousness. That we have been rescued to become like Jesus, to have his character formed in us, to begin speaking like Jesus and thinking like Jesus and loving like Jesus and living like Jesus in greater and greater ways, to become holy as he is holy. That this is not just some side project for some people, but that this entire community is going to be called to become something, an oak of righteousness formed in the image of Jesus. And we are also rescued for something. And how we are articulating it is for the display of God's glory and splendor to the world. We are rescued for that purpose. Here's what that means. Your life is about more than you. Your life is about more than your job or the money that you earn and put in your bank account. It's more about the possessions you have, the number of followers you have or likes you get. It's about more than the recognition you get for what you do, the degrees you have, the house you own, the heights you reach, the followers you have. It's about living to show the world that there is a God and that he is more beautiful and more splendid and glorious than anything you can imagine, and that we are here to show them that very reality. It's about recapturing our original purpose and remembering that what Jesus has done is for us to become something and to live for something. And so Jesus has come to restore us to our original purpose. He gives us his spirit and his glory so that we can go out into the world and show it who God is like through our lives. So here's what that means. Take what God has put in your hands and do it for his glory and the good of the people around you. Be a great mom. Be a great dad or grandparent. Be a great employee. Be a great student. Be a great coworker. Be a great teacher, accountant, construction worker, receptionist, neighbor. Excel at that, but do it always for the glory of God and the good of people around you, because the people around you need to see something of who God is. So when you go to work tomorrow, you are there not just to make money and wait till Friday. If you follow Jesus, Jesus in the Bible will tell you that you are there to display the glory of God, to represent God to a world that is lost and hurting. And when you do that, God's glory comes and inhabits that space. And his splendor is seen. So your life has purpose. I love what a scholar that I read studying for this said. You are a communication from God about God. Just like the heavens, your conduct, your life is itself a kind of divine speech. It is a revelation from God designed to show the world what he is like. So here's the question. How do we know if we're actually doing this? How do we know if, as a church, if we could paint a picture, how will we know that we're actually living for the display of God's splendor? Got a couple answers. When the brokenhearted, the disillusioned, the captives, those locked in darkness, the mourning, the hurting, when they can feel like they can call this place home and not believe in Jesus yet. When every single person here is wanted, not just welcomed. Loved, not just liked. Invited in and not just tolerated. Then I think we'll start to see God's glory on display. What if this place became a place where the people that everyone overlooks and ignores actually can belong? An example is, what if this place was a home for people with disabilities and families of kids that are not neurotypical? They need a place to belong, to be loved, to have a chance to worship as a family. What if we became a place like that? I think if we do that, then we start to display the splendor of God because he loves them too. I think when we begin as a church to look more like our city, that we look more like every tribe, tongue, and nation, and we are okay worshiping shoulder to shoulder with people who look different than us, think different than us, act different than us, and maybe believe something different than we do. And that we do that and we still maintain unity because we want this place to reflect the kingdom of God and the glory of the God who came to establish it. What if, like, our workplaces and coffee shops and schools we visit that people actually experience something different. See, your life is meant to look different because you follow a beautiful God. So if you go into your work this week or your school and you say, I believe in a holy and beautiful, powerful God, but your life doesn't look different than those who don't, then there's something wrong. What if the love and the joy and the peace and the patience and the kindness and the gentleness of Jesus inhabited where you are sent tomorrow because you're there? And people have questions like, why do you live like that? Why do you love like that? Why do you treat people like that? Then we'll know that we're displaying God's splendor. I know I gotta hurry. We will know we are displaying God's splendor when we are seeing captives set free. Homelessness, the addiction, fentanyl overdoses, things that are happening in our city, when people locked in addiction are being set free from that, we will know. We have a church that meets just on Friday nights called Recovery Church. You need to get involved because that is a church that is working alongside people who are in recovery. It's not just for people in recovery, but it's for people that, man, I am desperate for something to change in my life. I've been stuck in this cycle. I need something to break me free. God is doing amazing things over there. People are getting baptized. I was told a story where a homeless young adult was walking from Aldergrove to come on Friday nights. We display God's splendor when that happens more and more. When the lonely are finding loving community and being invited to your table and into your life, when the brokenhearted find healing as we listen to them and love them in their pain, when we make space for people to grieve and we don't try to fix it, when joy is being released, worship is erupting, when that happens, then we're gonna know that God's glory and is being displayed. And this is what I believe that we're being called to do as a church, to display his glory by creating a community and being the kind of people that loved the people that Jesus loved and went to the people that Jesus went to. Will it be costly? Absolutely. Will it mean sacrifice? 100%. But nothing of any lasting significance ever happened without some sacrifice. And what if you could look back years from now and you could look back on the time that you spent on planet Earth, look back on the time you were a part of this community, and we saw Isaiah 61 more to life in our world than when we started this journey because of the part that we played. I think every sacrifice and every cost that it's going to cost us is going to be worth it if that happens. Don't you? So I want to say we are here to display the splendor and glory of God to a lost and hurting world. We are here to see people encounter God's blazing glory and be rescued from death into a life with him. That we will go to the people Jesus went to and walk with them as they become oaks of righteousness. And in our everyday lives, we are going to seek to be people who live in such a way that the glory of God shines through us and people are drawn to him because of it. This is who we are and this is who we want to be with God's help. And so I want one question and then we're done. Could you take a walk or set aside 5 minutes this week and ask God this one question? What is one thing I can do this year to contribute to the display of your splendor in this city and in my life out there? What is one thing? See, if we do that and every one of us receives that and then it goes to try and do it with the help of God, guess what? God's splendor will be displayed and we will see Isaiah 61 come to life. Father, I thank you for this word, the challenge, the beauty, the wonder of it, and how you've invited us to live into who we are and who we have been made to be. Help us to do that. Help us to know our part. And I pray that through this community and through our lives as we be the church, not just on Sunday, but every day, that your glory, your beauty would be displayed. And that this city and people's lives would look different just because we said yes to you. In Jesus' name.